Yeah, we back. Now, welcome to part 4, man. Welcome to a brand new series. As you already know, we have been reading a biography on the life of King Henri Christophe, man. One of the most legendary black men to ever walk the face of the earth. And like I said before, start at part 1. Start at episode 1 so everything makes sense. As you already know, in part 1, we discuss his origins. Where did he come from? How did he end up on the colony? What part of Africa did he come from? What part of the islands did he come from? Because he wasn't born inside the colony. He wasn't born inside of Haiti. He wasn't born in Saint-Domingue, right? In part 2, we discuss where was he during the first weeks and months of the revolution, his initial rise in status. In part 3, we discuss the rise to power when he became a high-ranking military man in Toussaint Louverture's armies. Now, not wasting no time, man. Let's jump straight into part 4, Black Crown by Paul Clammer. Let's get back into the book, man. Even before the conquest of Santo Domingo, Toussaint Louverture had begun to plan for Saint-Domingue's future. As always, the plantation was at the heart of the plans. In October 1800, he issued a strict decree that would govern the way the plantations were to be run under his rule. Workers were to obey their managers as if they were under military command. Vagrancy was to be severely punished, and the army was made responsible not only for administering discipline, but also for the productivity of the plantations. Dessalines and Moise were also made inspectors of agriculture. Toussaint said, "If I made my people work, it was for them to understand the price of liberty without license. It was to prevent the corruption of morals." Louverture would record later, "It was for the general happiness of the island and in the interest of the republic." It was an outlook that greatly appealed to Christophe, and in later years, when drawing up his own set of laws to govern Haiti, he was profoundly influenced by the disciplined morality of Louverture's agricultural programs. As part of the officer class who had become substantial landowners thanks to Louverture, he was of course also heavily invested personally into its success. In February 1801, Louverture announced plans to consolidate his power further with a proposal for a new constitution for the colony. The move was in response to Napoleon Bonaparte's seizure of power as French consul. Bonaparte's letter to Louverture confirming his rank included promises that the liberty and equality of all citizens of Saint-Domingue was sacred, but he also produced a new constitution that had potentially serious consequences for the colony. It stated that the colonies had different habits and customs compared to France, and so should be governed by ill-defined particular laws. The announcement was recognition that the political winds in France were blowing in a new and troublesome direction. The first consul was no radical. His wife Josephine came from a wealthy planter family in Martinique, and Bonaparte himself was sympathetic to the exiles who stalked Paris, complaining about the loss of their slaves. Louverture chose the 4th of February to announce the formation of his own constitutional assembly. It was no accident. It was the anniversary of France's official abolition of slavery, a policy that he had helped win on the battlefield. But the assembly also reflected Louverture's economic program for the colony. Most of the members were white planters who were supporters of his strict agricultural policies. The veteran campaigner, Julien Raymond, was one of the 3 mixed-race members. Only one black representative was chosen, Louverture's own nephew, Moise, but he refused to take his seat in protest at the prominence given to white representatives of what he saw as the pre-revolutionary order. Saint-Domingue's new constitution was unveiled at a public ceremony in Cap Français in July. Christophe, Moise, and the rest of the black officer class watched their commander preside over a ceremony where the white planter from Port-au-Prince, Bernard Bourgella, read the entire constitution to the gathered crowd, after which it was blessed by Corneille Brel, a Breton priest who had become Louverture's personal confessor. There can be no slaves in this territory. Servitude is permanently abolished. All men are born, live, and die free and French, Bourgella announced. All men were equal before the law, irrespective of their color, and were free to pursue any form of employment according to their virtue and talents. As a declaration of racial egalitarianism, it was unmatched by any constitution at the time. There was to be a strict class hierarchy, however, as the constitution entrenched the plantation workers placed in the colony's family. At the very top sat Louverture, who was proclaimed Saint-Domingue's governor for life, with the power to nominate his successor. He had taken Bonaparte's declaration that the colonies should be subject to special laws and subverted it to his own interests, confirming Saint-Domingue as an inalienable part of the French Empire, but granting himself the right to pass laws without any reference to Paris. One of Christophe's confidants, the military engineer Charles Vincent, was entrusted to carry the new constitution to Paris for approval. Vincent was highly skeptical of the document and told Louverture that he feared the constitution would be seen as a manifesto against France. Before he sailed from Cap Français, he left Christophe an unsealed letter, further outlining his objections, and urged his friend to use his usual wisdom, and to suggest to Louverture that he moderate his principles. In reply, Christophe told Vincent that he was the only European who really loves the people of Saint-Domingue. You have always told us the truth. The draft constitution was written by our most dangerous enemies. If Christophe truly shared Vincent's concerns, it is unclear whether he ever passed them on to Louverture, but in September of that year, Room, now banished to Philadelphia, tried to stir the pot by writing to the French government, suggesting that Christophe might prove himself a leader more loyal to France than the new governor for life. In his essay on the causes of the revolution and civil wars of Haiti, Vasty clearly articulated Christophe's position in hindsight by distancing himself from any French sympathies he may have once held and pinning the blame firmly on Louverture's white counselors. Vasty said, "They suggested to him the formation of a constitution which should render Haiti nearly independent of France, which he should have done completely or not at all. For such a measure admitted of no medium. It was necessary to be either dependent or independent, the one or the other. And General Toussaint, by rendering himself partially independent of France, exposed himself to her vengeance, without giving himself that means of resisting her." While Louverture was waiting for Bonaparte's reply, he had to face down one final challenge to his authority. In October, he was in Saint-Marc to attend Dessalines' wedding to Marie-Claireuse when he received news that the North had erupted in revolt. Cultivators in the towns of Marmelade, Dondon, Gonrivière had risen up against the harsh agricultural system, and on the 21st of October, alarms were sounded across Cap Français. The American consul Tobias Lear wrote that its citizens were tremblingly alive to every symptom of insurrection. Lear was reassured by Christophe, who told him that the sound of shooting was due to the want of discipline in some of the corps after rounding up idle laborers who were hiding in the city from their plantation managers. There was no serious cause to apprehend any disturbances. In fact, Christophe had just uncovered a conspiracy to overthrow his command. A group of men and women, tumultuously assembled, had gathered near the Waf and fought back against efforts to disperse them. Christophe seized the leader, a man called Toabal, who revealed the plot and gave out the names of his co-conspirators. Throughout the night, Christophe's men arrested 70 further plotters. The whole of this was performed with so little noise and confusion, wrote Louverture in his report on the affair, that thanks to the prudence and activity of General Christophe, calm was quickly restored to Cap Français. The following day was indeed calm, but on the morning of the 23rd of October, Lear was again with Christophe when an alarm took place in the city which spread dismay over every countenance. A cry of "shut your doors" ran like electricity through the streets, and terror spread in every quarter. Christophe reacted with the utmost coolness and left to investigate. Riding out with his dragoons, he realized the plantations were again in revolt. People were streaming towards the city speaking of attacks against whites, just as they had in August 1791. This time, however, the cultivators were badly organized and fled before the disciplined charges of Christophe's troops. At Port Margot and the town of Limbé, he successfully ordered them back to the fields. When he returned to Limbé later to find them attempting to take up arms again, he had the town commander arrested for sedition. From here, he wrote to Louverture to inform him of the events. Toussaint was already rushing north to Marmelade and sent Dessalines, fresh from his wedding, to help quell the trouble. Damn, Dessalines can't even... Dessalines gotta leave honeymoon, man. Dessalines had to leave the honeymoon, man. That's just crazy. Let's continue. Christophe continued his work on the northern plain, where his men rapidly restored order. The violence of the attempted revolt was quickly suppressed, but only after more than 350 people, mostly white men, women, and children, had been killed. Most shocking for Toussaint was the discovery that the figure behind the uprising was his own nephew, Moise. Moise had been appalled at the direction of Louverture's plans for the colony. As an agricultural inspector, he was known to be particularly lenient with the workers and had been a supporter of granting small plots of land to soldiers as small holdings. For him, Louverture's interests were increasingly aligned with those who had reigned over the plantations before the revolution. Moise had said, "It is always in the name of the interests of the metropole that Louverture scolds me," underlining where his sympathies lay by stating that "I will love the whites only when they have given me back the eye they took from me in battle." Now, time out. You see, Moise, that's low-key a forgotten figure of the revolution because he was right up there. He was right up there in terms of status, wealth, and power with, Toussaint, Dessalines, Christophe, all the most common names. Really, it should be, Dessalines, Christophe, Toussaint Louverture, and Moise. We never mentioned Moise. That's somebody that we low-key forgot about. We need to, we always talk about Alexander Petron, but we don't even talk about Moise, man. That's crazy. Let's continue. For Moise, the only way to defend black freedom was to expel them from the colony altogether, abolish the plantations, and proclaim complete independence from France. He laid his blame equally at the feet of Dessalines and Christophe for helping to uphold Toussaint's system of agriculture. When Moise was summoned to meet with his uncle and commanding officer, he found him in no mood for leniency. He was arrested and taken up au dépôt, where he was tried and sentenced to death. Now, I would say that this is the one blemish that Toussaint Louverture has on his record. When he killed Moise, listen, I don't care what nobody say. Toussaint Louverture, like I mentioned in the last video, in part 3, I said that's one of the greatest political minds that the black race has ever produced. The way he navigated between the Spanish and the Americans and the British and the French, and how he pinned each European power against each other for his own personal benefit. How he was able to independently negotiate with the British, sign private deals outside the knowledge of the French, import arms from the British, import arms from the Americans. One of the greatest political minds. But when he killed Moise, ain't no defending that. You can't defend it, sir. You just can't defend it, man. You can't defend it, man. Moise, he was a man of the people, man. As you can see, he was really a man of the people, man. When Moise came around, listen, the ancestors, they love Moise. They love Moise, man. They loved him. Now let's continue. As a final sign of defiance, when the firing squad was lined up before him, Moise refused the blindfold and personally directed the men to open fire. In Cap Français, Louverture's fury at his personal betrayal was made public. Several officers, including the Limbe commander arrested by Christophe, were blown from the cannons in front of the entire city garrison to show the fate of those who dared to question the system. In an angry speech, he expanded the list of would-be traitors to vagrants, idlers, libertines who sapped the moral fiber of the colony. Army officers who tolerated such behavior would be punished. Any that encouraged treason were to be summarily executed. Dessalines was put to work rooting out those who had taken part in the failed uprising. Several hundred soldiers and farmers were killed in these reprisals, which were deliberately bloody to drive home the message that dissent would not be tolerated. Christophe's role in this operation has not been recorded, but he most likely remained in Cap Français to ensure the smooth running and security of the city. He had performed well in a crucial hour, and for his role in quashing the rebellion, he was given Moise's old position as the highest ranking general in the north. Now, this is the thing. This is what Toussaint Louverture didn't understand, or maybe he did understand, I don't know. But when you have the majority of the population that rose up in revolt, when you have a good chunk of them that were born in Africa, taken from their homeland and taken to a foreign land, and a lot of them, they don't want to engage in the art of nation building. They don't want to engage in nation building. They want to go home, man. And rightly so, right? Rightly so. They want to go home. They don't want to be here for real. They don't care about building. This is not their nation. In their mind, this is not their nation, right? They left their nation behind back home. Their nation is back home. Their relatives are back home. Their family is back home. They don't want to be here. Toussaint Louverture talking about we got to build a nation. We got to build a prosperous nation. They don't want to hear none of that. They want to go back home, right? They don't want to do no work. They want to go back home. And this is something that Toussaint would have to contend with, Dessalines would have to contend with, and Christophe had to contend with. In fact, Dessalines on his original constitution made it illegal for you to abandon your citizenship and migrate to a foreign country. Because after independence, a lot of people don't talk about the fact that a good chunk of the population was like, okay, bet we fought for independence, we free, we independent, I bet it's time to go back to Africa, it's time to go back home. And Dessalines was like, bro, what you mean you going back home, bro? Like, you're not going nowhere, bro. Like, we got a nation to build. We got a nation to run, bro. Like, what do you mean home? Home? This is home now. This is home. And a lot of them, what you mean? This is not, I'm going home, bro. I'm not with none of this, bro. I've been here. I've been suffering since I'm going home, bro. And I feel that's going to be a common theme. That was a common theme throughout the administrations of Toussaint, Dessalines, and Christophe, right? You got the government talk about, man, listen, we gotta build a nation, man. We gotta rebuild. We gotta recover from the war. We gotta start from scratch. And then you got a good chunk of the population saying, man, forget all that. I'm trying to go home, man. I'm trying to go back home to Africa. I'm trying to go back home to my mama. I left my mama back home. I left my girl back home. I left my kids back home. I left my pops back home. I left my brother back home. A good chunk of the population, that's what they going through. So yeah, let's continue. Whatever doubts he may have privately entertained about Louverture's new constitution, Christophe had proved his loyalty to his commanding officer and his political system. That system allowed Louverture to nominate his successor as governor for life. and with the execution of Moise, there were now only two possible men who could stand as candidates, Dessalines and Christophe. Charles Vincent reached Paris in October 1801, just as the last of the Moise uprising was being put down. Christophe and Louverture would be celebrated in the French newspapers for their actions, when Napoleon Bonaparte was in no mood to learn of Saint-Domingue's new constitution. For 6 months, he had been debating what to do with the colony. His initial lauding of Louverture was replaced with deep suspicion after the unauthorized conquest of Santo Domingo. As the words of the colonial lobby dripped into his ears, he decided that the black general needed to be put in his place. Plans for a military expedition were prepared and then given new impetus in the summer of 1801 when London offered a peace deal to end the long war between Britain and France. With the British blockade of French ports ended, it was finally possible for a fleet to sail to Saint-Domingue. An army of 21,000 soldiers was assembled to embark from the Atlantic port of Brest, many of them veterans of the wars that France had fought almost continually since 1793. To lead the largest military expedition of his career, Bonaparte chose his own brother-in-law, General Charles Victoire Emmanuel Leclerc, who had served with him in the Italian campaigns and was married to his sister, Pauline. She was to accompany the expedition too. As stories of Saint-Domingue's wealth were still common currency, many French officers signed up with the hope that they might claim a plantation as spoils of war and return home as rich as a Creole. Vincent warned Bonaparte that Saint-Domingue could not be conquered militarily, reminding him that its climate was destructive to European soldiers and that Louverture had already seen off the British and the Spanish. To counter this, Bonaparte hoped to use stratagem as well as force. Leclerc was to make assurances that France would never place irons on those she had recognized as free, and offer Louverture and his command retirement with full military honors, provided that they leave the colony. Louverture's Paris-educated sons, Isaac and Placide, accompanied the expedition to offer their father assurances of France's peaceful intentions, which they received during a private audience with Bonaparte himself. Only if Louverture offered resistance would the military fists be unleashed. After what Bonaparte still hoped would be a swift victory, all black officers above the rank of captain were to be deported, allowing for a new start for the colony. Keen to be part of this new project were André Rigaud and Alexander Pétion, who eagerly signed up for the expedition. Listen, André Rigaud and Alexander Pétion, the same ones who got washed back in 1799 and went into exile, went back to their daddy's house. Like I said before, they came back with their daddy. You know what I mean? Yeah, they came back with their daddy. You know what I'm saying? Oh, we gonna wage war against the black man? Oh yeah, they came back with their daddy. Let's continue. Other orders were left unwritten. Bonaparte almost certainly planned a return to slavery in the colony. As well as dispatching his armada to Saint-Domingue, forces were also sent to Martinique and Guadeloupe, where slavery was to be restored immediately. Only a year earlier, Bonaparte appeared reconciled to black freedom, saying, "They will produce less sugar maybe than they did as slaves, but they'll produce it for us and will serve us if we need them as soldiers. We will have one less sugar mill, but we will have one more citadel filled with soldiers." Now threatened by Louverture's ambition, he set his face in the opposite direction. Rumors of a French fleet began to circulate in Saint-Domingue the moment news arrived of the peace between Britain and France. Louverture was forced to call for calm. It was inconceivable, he said, that France could attack a colony that he had led back to prosperity. Yet he too nursed his own suspicions and reminded his followers that France does not have the right to enslave us. Our freedom does not belong to her. It is our right, and we will know how to defend it or else perish. Orders were issued not to allow any French ships to land without its express permission. The French Armada was spotted off the eastern tip of Santo Domingo at the end of January 1802. On spying the size of the fleet, Louverture's worst fears were confirmed. "We must perish," he is reported to have said. "All of France has come to Saint-Domingue." The number of ships was even greater than he realized, as Leclerc had already split his forces to send squadrons to simultaneously seize all of the major ports. As Cap Français was the biggest prize of all, it was here that Leclerc directed his own ships. Christophe had been busy preparing the city for their arrival. As the troops drilled, he ordered the streets swept clean and lamps lit to show how life was prospering under his rule. Theaters were packed for nightly performances, and every Sunday, Christophe hosted dinners for the city's most distinguished citizens at the governor's palace. When he learned that the fleet had been spotted and would arrive the next day, he declared that nothing would give him more pleasure than to receive the French in their own home. To set the terms of that welcome, Christophe had ordered the removal of the buoys, marking a safe passage through the reefs that guarded the harbor. When the French fleet arrived, it was met with 2 warning cannon shots. And to Leclerc's dismay, he was reduced to anchoring at distance and sending an envoy to Christophe, demanding his ships be allowed to land, along with a copy of Bonaparte's message to Saint-Domingue. Now listen, the French done sent the largest military expedition in history, right? So they trying to land in the northern city that Christophe controls, right? The northern city of Cap Français, right? So as soon as they're approaching the harbor, Christophe already letting off shots. Christophe already firing the cannons. So now they had to anchor at a distance and had to politely ask permission to land in the city. They thought they was gonna make this whole big scene, this whole big, fiasco. And as soon as they show up, as soon as they pull up, they getting hit with the cannons. Let's continue. The proclamation began with the assurance that the colony's inhabitants, whatever your origin or color, were all French and free, and that now peace reigned in Europe, the mother country was finally able to send troops to protect the colonies. Oh my God, man, the propaganda is insane. They've been running the propaganda forever, man. Listen, they have come here to destroy the blacks, right? But what they're saying is, we've come here to protect the colony, right? It's the same thing. We are here to protect you. We are here to save you. We are here to, we are here to protect you. We want to establish a military base here to protect you, right? We need to invade and intervene in your country to protect you. Listen, they've been running the same play and the same propaganda for centuries, man. Let's continue. Anyone who defied Bonaparte would be a traitor to his country, and the wrath of the Republic shall devour him as fire devours your parched sugar canes. General Leclerc's letter to Christophe was no less emphatic. He said, I learn with indignation, Citizen General, that you refuse to receive the French squadron and the French army that I command, under the pretext that you have received no orders from the Governor General Toussaint. France has concluded a peace with England, and its government sends to Saint-Domingue forces capable of subduing the rebels, at least if they are to be found. As to you, General, I confess it will grieve me to account you among them. Leclerc ordered Christophe to immediately surrender his command and held him responsible for the consequences should he refuse. Christophe laughed at the suggestion, and he said, you say the French government has sent to Saint-Domingue forces capable of subduing the rebels, if any such be found. It is your coming and the hostile intentions you manifest that alone could create them among a peaceable people. In perfect submission to France, the very mention of rebellion is an argument for our resistance. Christophe reiterated that he could only act on Toussaint's orders and referred to Leclerc's troops as so many pieces of cards which the least breath of wind will dissipate. To stall for time, Christophe rushed an urgent letter to Toussaint, asking him to come to Cap Français as soon as possible. Christophe was like, yo, bro, they owe me, bro. Get up here now, bro. Get up here now. Let's continue. Christophe's refusal dismayed the city's ruling council. A delegation led by the black mayor, César Telemaque, begged him to change his mind. Knowing the risk that Christophe had been ordered to burn the city rather than hand it over, they reminded him of the conflagration of 1793 when Christophe himself had fought so hard to defend the city against the flames. You speak like a planter, Christophe told Telemaque. I can place no confidence in you. A delegation of American merchants led by the U.S. consul Tobias Lear was simply told to board up their houses for safety. Nah, I'm taking that. When Christophe told Telemaque, you speak like a planter. Nah, I'm taking that. That was hard. That was hard, bro. Whenever somebody talking some nonsense, bro, you speak like a planter. No, let's continue. Leclerc's reluctance to force a landing bought Christophe an extra day. But with Louverture absent and the news arriving that the French had captured Fort Liberté under fire, Christophe realized that action was needed. The city police were replaced by soldiers under his command. Women, children, and the sick were ordered to leave the city for their safety. His wife, Marie-Louise, joined the procession with Ferdinand, Amethyst, and Antanayer, who was still a toddler. Christophe saw that the family's prized possessions were loaded onto carts. The treasury and other strategic buildings were emptied, and Christophe's officer, Barada, oversaw the distribution of torches and inflammable material. As the city held its breath, Leclerc seized the moment. He ordered a landing to surprise Christophe from the rear, but the only local pilot he could find deliberately misdirected the fleet, delaying its landing by several hours. This was all that Christophe needed. When the city had been razed after white counter-revolutionaries had tried to seize it, it had helped usher in the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, the stakes were even higher. The fire would be a deliberate act of sabotage. Toussaint had cautioned that destruction and fire were the best weapons against invasion. As the sun began to dip, Christophe gathered his men in front of the warehouses along the waterfront and ordered a torch. Within minutes, orange flames were licking up into the darkening sky. Soldiers across the city followed the commander's lead. Government officers were fired, as were the barracks and the now empty arsenal. The church was not spared, nor was Christophe's own house. Time out, man. Christophe done blew up his own house, man. Listen, real revolutionary, man. Blew up his own mansion. Nigga, what black man you know? What black man you know in the modern day, they gonna blow up his own mansion? Nigga blew up his own mansion. They said Christophe had one of the most beautiful houses in the capital. Nigga blew up his own mansion, bro, when the French landed. Blew up his own house. Let's continue. As the fire began to spread, some citizens tried to protect the hospital, but were beaten back by the flames. Others who had ignored the order to leave now scrambled up the mountain overlooking the city. A few people, including Tobias Lear, managed to slip onto boats and rowed towards the French ships. The men who received them could only watch as the dark waters of the bay reflected back the growing inferno and the explosion from the forts as their magazines exploded one by one. As the French troops that had landed approached Cap Français the following day, the city was still ablaze. It would take 3 days to extinguish the last of the fire. For now, control of the city was still contested. It was into this scene that Toussaint finally arrived, meeting Christophe by the shell of the main hospital. Christophe was forthright in defending his actions in reducing the city to smoke and ashes. "What do you expect, General? My duty, my necessity, my circumstances, and the repeated threats made by the general commanding the squadron forced me to do so." Of course, Louverture was relieved that Christophe had followed his orders to the letter, but in a memoir he wrote to Bonaparte the following year that he sought to exonerate himself and reflect the blame back onto his subordinate for the rigorous method of defending the city. The imminent arrival of the French left little time for a conference. Toussaint ordered Christophe to retreat with his soldiers to the Bonnet à l'Evêque, an easily defensible spot folded into the mountains 16 kilometers south of Cap Français. The heavily wooded slopes here were pocked with limestone caves that were now pressed into use as bases for guerrilla warfare. His wife, Marie-Louise, and their children were sent to safety at Gonlivière, while the Cap Français treasury was stashed in the deep caves of Dondon, guarded not just by their inaccessibility, but also by the symbolic petroglyphs carved into the cave walls by the region's original Taino inhabitants. Getting there was a close-run thing. Soon after Christophe took his leave from Toussaint, his troops had their first encounter with French troops. There was a scrappy melee, and Christophe's horse took a musket ball, forcing him to dismount and swim the river at Eau du Cap in order to escape. Damn, man. The white boys had Christophe swimming. Yo, the ancestors went through some crazy things, man. The ancestors really went through some crazy things. They lived some crazy lives, man. Let's continue. It took time for Leclerc to fully land all his troops in the ruins of Cap Français, by which time Toussaint had issued orders to adopt a scorched earth policy. All of Saint-Domingue's towns must burn to slow the French and buy time until the rainy season that will rid us of our enemies. He also hoped to raise the cultivators on the plantations to bolster his forces, but in many places was surprised when the farmers reacted with cynicism. "When we took up arms with Moise against the whites, didn't the governor exterminate us?" they asked. "Why doesn't he resuscitate Moise if he wants to fight the whites?" Let's continue. Christophe, despite having played a key role in suppressing that uprising, had more luck, perhaps through having shown his commitment to rebellion by his act of arson. For a week, he crisscrossed the plantations to raise the cultivators, urging them to ignore the amnesty that Leclerc was now offering and to join his 2,000-strong corps of well-trained soldiers. It took a week for Leclerc to fully organize his forces, although the town of Port-de-Paix in the northwest had also been burned rather than surrendering. Leclerc's generals had successfully taken the rest of Saint-Domingue's port towns, and he now plotted his next move to enact Bonaparte's orders as quickly as he could. 3 divisions would set out from Cap Français, Fort Liberté, and Port-de-Paix to create a cordon across the north, hoping to flush the enemy out of the mountains. At the same time, a 4th division would march up from Port-au-Prince and trap the rebels in a pincer movement. On the 17th of February, Toussaint and Christophe were formally declared outlaws from the laws of the colony, and the French forces finally began to move into the field. The central prong of the northern attack was led by General Jean Hardy, who was charged with bringing Christophe to heel. Some of Hardy's troops had surprised Toussaint on the outskirts of Cap Français the day after landing and almost shot him before he managed to flee. An event that filled the general with confidence that this would be a short-lived campaign. Within a day, he was able to test the proposition when he engaged Christophe in his first action. Christophe was entrenched with his troops. They had a red flag flying and sent back the words, "War to the death," when we offered to treat with them, wrote one French officer. But it appears that Christophe allowed himself to be surprised by the attack, and after offering serious resistance, he decided to protect his forces by withdrawing, leaving his food stores to be captured. Christophe then moved west towards the town of Henri, where Toussaint kept his plantation, but again he was chased by the French and lost men and supplies. Toussaint was likewise put under pressure. He attempted to fight the first pitched battle against the French on his own terms. With 3,000 troops, he blocked the narrow valley that was an important passage through the mountains and sent decoys to tempt the French column led by General Rochambeau. The trap had worked, and his grenadiers rained fire on the French before the engagement evolved into desperate hand-to-hand combat. Toussaint eventually withdrew, and both sides claimed victory in the fight. Though his side had taken many casualties, it was clear that a new approach was needed before his forces began to melt away or surrender to Leclerc. The plan he devised was simple. Dessalines still held his forces at full strength and was ordered to lure the French into battle at an easily defensible site, acting as an anvil to break their main strength. When exhausted, the French would be attacked at their rear by Louverture and Christophe's reconstituted forces. Whatever European troops remained could then easily be pinned back to the coast. The location that Toussaint picked for this battle was Fort Catapeau, built by the British where the Artibonite Valley began to rise into the mountains. It sat on a narrow hilltop with a steep escarpment looking down on one side to the Artibonite River and the town of Petite Rivière. On the remaining sides, a wild field of fire gave the defenders a strong advantage against troops attacking uphill, while trenches dug outside the walls strengthened the defenders' position even further. With some 1,200 soldiers garrisoned inside the fort, Dessalines waited for the French wave to break upon his position. He did not have to wait long. Leclerc believed that victory here would quickly pave the way for complete military control of Saint-Domingue. Several French divisions were soon converging on Catapeau, led by General Jean Boudet, who had followed the bait from Saint-Marc, which Dessalines had left in ashes like Cap Français. Joining Boudet from Port-au-Prince was Alexander Pétion, who now commanded the artillery of the 13th Demi-Brigade. 2 years after he fled the disastrous siege of Jacmel, he was no doubt eager to take the fight back to the opponent. The first assault on the fort was a disaster. The French officer Pamphile de la Croix, who took part in the siege, recorded how local plantation workers guided the advancing troops through the terrain in order to make the surprise night attack, not suspecting that they were being led into a trap. When they spied a number of their enemy apparently asleep outside the walls of the fort above them, Lacroix' soldiers charged. The dozing soldiers immediately took cover in hidden trenches, and the whole of the fort seemed to burst into a great volley of fire. Exposed on the hill in bright moonlight, the French fell in their dozens. When they had regrouped, a second assault met with the same fate and left one general with 2 musket wounds. Dessalines then exposed his assailants a third time by ordering his troops to fix their bayonets and feint a counterattack, luring his enemies back into the field of fire. When the battle was concluded, several hundred French soldiers were dead. The battle turned into a siege, and Toussaint's plan that it would suck in more and more French troops began to bear fruit. 2 more French divisions arrived as reinforcements, but Catapeau's superb position made it easy to defend. On such poor terrain, Pétion's artillery proved ineffectual. For 3 weeks, Dessalines stood firm. "Take courage," he exhorted his troops. "The French cannot hold out against us here in Saint-Domingue. They will fight well at first, but soon they will fall sick and die like flies." He warned them that the road ahead would not necessarily take a straight path. "Listen well, if Dessalines surrenders to them 100 times, he will betray them 100 times. Only then will they prevail against the French, who would be forced to take their ships and flee." Then, declared Dessalines, for the first time making explicit the end point, that the revolution had been inexorably heading towards "I will make you independent. There will be no more whites among us." While Catapeau was besieged, Toussaint ordered Christophe to regroup at Gonrivière, where their wives were quartered. When the first rumors of the French Armada had begun to circulate, the 2 generals had turned the area into a sizable munitions dump. From here, Christophe set out on the offensive again. He ranged across the northern plain, urging cultivators to burn whatever cane fields that were still under production. He raided the towns of Thierry Rouge, Trou du Nord, and Limonade, while at Saint-Suzanne, the former Maroon officer Sans Souci repulsed a French counterattack, capturing many white soldiers in return. Christophe wrote to Toussaint praising the bravery of his soldiers who had just flushed the French out of Quartier Morin and Petite Anse, both barely outside the city limits of Cap Français itself. A week later, he even managed to place an artillery piece on a hill outside the city and put it under fire for the first time since the arrival of Leclerc's fleet before abandoning the camp in a running battle. The clash was reported by Tobias Lear, who ended his letter by noting rumors that Dessalines had been forced to abandon Créteil. His tone suggested that the French had easily carried the day, but it soon became apparent that the victory had been Pyrrhic. Christophe, who had been privy to the original strategy, was much clearer about the outcome, writing to Toussaint that his soldiers had cheered to learn how those who were inspired by the powerful zeal of liberty had so thoroughly humbled their enemies. Christophe was further invigorated after an unexpected encounter at Dondon. The French General Henri had been one of those sent to Créteil, and now his column was retiring in a hellish routine of fatigue and deprivation to Cap Français, harassed by ambushes all the way from the Artibonite Valley. His troops were completely unprepared when they chanced by accident on Christophe's base in the heat of the afternoon. The column broke instantly as the rebels came out of the rough woodland to pursue the French at bayonet point. With a handful of men in the gorges and defiles of Dondon, Christophe cheered later. We defeated, dispersed, and cut to pieces the troops of Hardy's division. By the time the shattered Hardy reached Cap Français, he had lost almost 400 men. By the beginning of April, a military stalemate had settled on the colony. The French had been bled white, and it was quickly becoming clear that beyond the towns and cities they could barely control any territory that lay beyond musket range. For Louverture, his forces could roam with increasing freedom in the countryside, but losses on their own side meant that attacks on French positions were becoming harder to sustain. Troop ships continued to arrive at Cap Français and Port-au-Prince, and some of his commanders had already surrendered. Christophe's commander, Paul Romain, summed up the situation by saying, his troops had burned their way across the northern plains, but had still failed to make any significant breakthroughs against the French. It was vital that the revolt survive until the rainy season began, when tropical fever would return a vital weapon to their armory. At the start of April, Toussaint opened a secret correspondence with the French General Boudet, who had been wounded at Créteil. He proudly defended both the military decisions he had taken since the arrival of the Leclerc expedition and his record as Governor General in restoring order to the colony. Affirming his dedication to France, he suggested that his own retirement from the politics of Saint-Domingue had been long planned once his task of fully restoring agriculture had been completed. While Toussaint openly advised Boudet of his mistrust of Leclerc, he made it clear that there was room for a political settlement to the war. The letter was bait. Toussaint had written to the general from Christophe's mountain camp at Dondon, and it is likely that he consulted with his most trusted lieutenant when opening the channel to Boudet. With no clear military solution on the table, negotiations with the French would buy them time to plan for a longer campaign. If so, the lure worked. Less than a week later, Christophe received an approach of his own from the French. It was written by his daughter's godfather, Wilton, at Petite Anse. Within days, Hardy and Leclerc were also writing to Christophe, sparking an extraordinary set of correspondence that gives one of the best insights into the political thinking of the revolutionaries that had survived. Wilton's first letter on the 16th of April played on the ancient friendship between the two men and expressed regret that Christophe, who had once shown such devotion to the French nation, had pursued a course of action that had plunged him and his family into the most frightful misery. Passing over the bloodshed of the previous months as if it were a modest disagreement over a hand of cards, Wilton felt sure that Christophe's actions were purely the result of evil counsel. He told Christophe that Leclerc held a high opinion of him, and he offered a clean slate to all who would come back to the French side. By doing so, Wilton pressed his old friend by saying, "You will secure for yourself and your family every happiness you can desire, especially if you should desire to quit the colony. You will be certain of liberal fortune and may enjoy it peacefully under the protection of France in the country of your choice." The letter was followed by a note directly from Leclerc, assuring Christophe everything that Wilton had said was true. He said, "I will keep the promises which have been made to you," wrote the French general. "But if it is in your intention to submit to the Republic, think on the essential service you could render her by furnishing the means of securing the person of General Toussaint." Christophe answered Wilton the following day. There was none of the affable tone of old friends, rather an acknowledgement that their relationship allowed Christophe the luxury of speaking frankly. He described himself as a Frenchman loving and respecting France, who hoped to have his confidence in the government of the mother country fostered and confirmed from day to day. It was the clerk who had betrayed the confidence. Christophe said, Saint-Domingue, Holy French, enjoyed, as you know, the profoundest tranquility. There were no rebels to be found. By what fatal blindness, then, did it happen that France has come with all the terrors of war and the artillery of destruction? Not to subdue the rebels, but to create them amongst a peaceful people and furnish a pretext to destroy us or enslave us. Slavery was the word that Leclerc dared not yet speak aloud, but Christophe understood that it was at the heart of the enterprise. He had seen the letters written by the colonists hoping to return Saint-Domingue's people to bondage, and the actions of the French army had only proved their point. His honor, his one true possession, had compelled him to take actions for which he would not apologize. Christophe said, "What happiness, what fortune, what splendid establishment of myself and my family could ever have offered me consolation for the grief of seeing my fellows reduced to the last degree of misfortune beneath the burden of slavery? My sentiments have never varied. I have always been the same man, but placed as I was by my fellow citizens as a sentinel at the post where it was my duty to watch over the preservation of liberty, more dear to them and their existence, how could I do otherwise than alarm them at the approach of the blow aimed at its annihilation?" Christophe suggested to Wilton that there was no sacrifice that I will not make for the peace and happiness of my fellow citizens, if I am but convinced that they shall be all free and happy. If these assurances could be given, he would gladly return to the fold and help restore tranquility to the colony. French General Henri now took up the correspondence. Their recent clashes had taught him to respect his opponent, and he addressed Christophe with the frankness of a soldier, unacquainted with shifts and evasions. The two of them were equals rather than rivals. He urged Christophe to abandon the crafty men who had poisoned his thinking and hoped they would soon embrace as brothers. With this in mind, he offered Christophe a parley, assuring him that should negotiations fail, he will be free to return to his camp unhindered. The lies, boy. Lies. Let's continue. "The candor with which you address me is worthy in all respects of a soldier like yourself," Christophe replied. "If only Leclerc had spoken to him in such a manner, instead of proposing to me an act of treason and infamy which would degrade me in my own eyes, he would have happily taken up Hardy's offer." In response to Hardy's defense of revolutionary liberty, Christophe countered that Saint-Domingue's freedoms had been purchased at the price of our blood, and forced France to act. Invoking the French Constitution of 1799 and the accompanying declaration that liberty and equality of this newly freed would always be preserved, he urged Hardy to read up on his law. Only these guarantees could convince him that France's intentions were benign. Furnish these proofs to the people of the colony who water and fertilize it with their sweat, and our interview will be crowned with the happiest success. Christophe would return to the French camp, and Toussaint would gladly do the same. In a separate letter to Leclerc, Christophe said that it would be perfidy to help the general arrange Louverture's surrender. Christophe said, "He is my commander, and he is my friend. Is friendship, Citizen General, compatible with such monstrous baseness?" But everything would change if Leclerc could show him the printed laws that still guaranteed freedom. "In the name of my country, in the name of the mother country, I call for these salutary laws. Produce them, and Saint-Domingue is saved." Christophe remained in contact with Toussaint throughout his correspondence and sent copies to his commander along with his responses. On the day he received Leclerc's offer, he wrote to Toussaint for his opinion. Due to the highly sensitive nature of their plans, he sent his dispatch via one of his most trusted officers to receive Toussaint's response verbally. He was accompanied by an armorer named Roy to help with the manufacture of bullets, even while negotiations were ongoing. Maintaining their fighting capability remained of vital importance. All right, man. Listen, we can end part 4 right here, right? It's part 4, right? Yeah, we could end part 4 right here, man. You know, Black Crown by Paul Clammer. We are reading Black Crown by Paul Clammer, you know? Yeah. Let's get into it, man. Let's get through it. Anyways, man, it's your boy Nevercari, that's Celine back in the building. Yes, indeed. Cash App in the description. Support the album, man. Support the album. Peace.
No. Feel like I'm 75. Know that your team be full of them traders, you know that can never be mine. I'm grabbing a thought when I drive. I'm back in my zone and we on. She said that she ready to come be my wife, yeah, hoping I don't do her wrong. I gave her my word and it's bond. I'm whipping the best like a lamb. I'm eating no chicken and lamb. Accustomed to call me the man. I never be up on the gram. I'm keeping that way undercover. She want me to tell her I love her. I told her I'm breaking the rules. I told her we making the news. Back in my city, they loving me. Standing alone, I'm 100 deep. Enemy riding and still in reach. They try to make sure that we underneath, trying to make sure that we never make it. Coming for power, come get acquainted. Coming for everything that I wanted. Feeling like Drake, but I really wrote it. Feeling like Kendrick, I'm checking names. Gotta roll up while I go insane. Got so much stress, I been gained weight. Stuffing these racks in this Louis case. One thing for certain, I'm about to check. Keep it 100 and nothing less. Stick with the family since day one. Had to stay down till my day come. Had to stay down, but I'm never patient. Hop on the mic and I'm motivated. Hop on the mic and I drop a classic. Haters can't see me, they copping glasses. Back in the studio making magic. Got a new tape and it's in production. Back on my business, I got a budget. Staying low key when I'm out in public. Feel like I'm 75. None of your team be full of them traders, you know that can never be mine. I'm grabbing a thought when I drive. I'm back in my zone and we on. She said that she ready to come be my wifey and hoping I don't do her wrong. I gave her my word in this bond. I'm whipping the best like a lamb. I mean no chicken and lamb. Accustomed to call me the man. I never be up on the gram. I'm keeping that way undercover. She want me to tell her I love her. I told her I'm breaking the rules. I told her we making the news. Making the news. Making the news. Breaking the rules. Yeah. Know that we making the news.